In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the case of the United Kingdom. And this is a country that is really steeped in tradition, and there's going to be lots of it that's similar to what we're used to in the United States, or I should say some things. Because, of course, the United States comes out of the tradition of the UK, but there's going to be a number of other things that are going to be very different for us. And so we need to kind of go in and be ready for that. And we want to think about some key elements. The United Kingdom is a democracy, a gradual traditionalistic democracy that emerges out of a monarchy and has its own constitutionalism, although it's not going to be the kind of constitution that you're used to. So let's go through some of the profile features and compare the United Kingdom to our own country in the United States, or so far our only country. The population of the United Kingdom is a little over 63 million people. The area is 243 square kilometers. The head of state is the Queen, Queen Elizabeth II, since 1952. And this is a rich country, so that according to the World Bank in 2013, the GDP per capita was $41,787. So this is an advanced Western democracy, but it's not a huge country. And to put it in perspective, right? I mean, it's easy to say, okay, a little over 63 million people. But if we were to take a look at the United Kingdom compared to the United States, we're going to see that it's about the size of Oregon, or about 2/3 the size of the population of Japan, with 63 million citizens. So this is an island country. This is a relatively small but dense island country that is a constitutional monarchy. The United Kingdom is actually composed of both itself and Northern Ireland, and the Great Britain, the major part of the country itself, is composed of a number of nationalities. So you have English and Scottish and Welsh people. But most people will identify, about 80% of people will identify as being Britons. And you can see that the United Kingdom is in fact separate from the rest of Europe. And so that makes it unique as well. It is a country that identifies as European, but not as continental. And that's going to be an important part and parcel of what makes the United Kingdom unique. The United Kingdom is a constitutional monarchy. While much of Europe in the 17th century is marked by monarchical absolutism, that means that kings that have all the power, these states will grow with monarch power. In contrast, in England, Parliament will remain a powerful institution, and when King James, followed by his son Charles I, would enforce a religious orthodoxy and force Parliament to consent to specific kinds of taxation, this would lead to the English Civil Wars, pitting the Roundheads against the Royalist Cavaliers. So Charles I would ultimately be deposed and executed in 1649, and England would function without a monarch for 11 years, or from 1649 until 1660. And during this time, it would be dominated by Oliver Cromwell until his death. This would then return the country back to kings and to Charles II. So this is a country that has a civil war, and while a king returns, this returning allows Parliament to have a significant amount of power. Another early developmental issue in Britain that you should be aware is this document you've probably heard of before that happens in 1215, the Magna Carta. The Magna Carta, which the British nobles obliged King John to sign in 1215, is in essence a compact between the nobles and the monarchs, which limits the power of the monarch and subjects them to a higher law. So we can see early on that kings in the United Kingdom are going to be limited in ways that their continental counterparts will not. And they're going to be part of a tradition where Parliament will slowly but surely gain mechanisms of sovereignty. Another element that's going to come out of the United Kingdom, and this is something that we share in the United States, is something called common law, or the idea that precedent and long-standing usage and practice should have the same standing as acts passed by a Congress or by a Parliament. Now, we don't want to spend a lot of time in history, but we should note a few eras, especially for our purposes in class, and one is the Victorian era, and this is during the 19th century. During Queen Victoria's era, there'd be a huge expansion of liberalism, and Britain would actually be an empire that we call the British Empire, which would be a place where people would say that the sun never sets because the British Empire would be around the globe, and so no matter where you were, there was day, the sun could be up. By its zenith in 1870, the United Kingdom would control about a quarter of all world trade, and the dimensions of it's simply staggering. It governs 1/4 of the world's population, and by this point directly rules almost 50 countries. And so the United Kingdom is going to help us understand colonialism from the point of view of the colonizer. And as we take a look at other countries, and we take a look at the post-colonial age, which is going to be a big part of what we do, we're going to have to understand it in light of the British Empire, because most post-colonial worlds are a response to British colonialism. During the 19th century, we'll also see an expansion of the suffrage. So suffrage and colonialism will come together. The 20th century is going to be defined by the Great War, what will become known as World War I and World War II. And these world wars are enormously costly in terms of both lives and resources. But it's particularly unique because it marks, with World War II, the complete collapse of the British Empire, and Britain once again being the island country that it is. It will also be in the 20th century that voting rights will be expanded to women, and the construction of the Labour Party and the welfare state will begin in earnest. Eventually, late in the 20th century, we'll see integration with the European Union, but this identity of being separate will continue because the EU will never accept or adopt the euro. So, what kind of country do we have? The regime, as I've noted, is a constitutional monarchy, and in this case we have a parliamentary democracy. And we're going to talk about this more, but there is no written formal constitution. Instead, the constitution is unwritten and includes certain laws and rights that exist. The executive will be a prime minister with a cabinet, which collectively will be known as a government. And the selection of that prime minister and that cabinet will be done by parliament, or that we should say the majority party in parliament. The legislature is bicameral. That means it has two sections. There's an upper house of lords and a lower chamber, the House of Commons. And we're going to see that all of the power is actually vested in the House of Commons. So when we talk about parliament, we're often meaning the House of Commons. So let's go through some of these political institutions in just a little bit of detail. The head of state in the United Kingdom is actually the crown, right? So the monarch is the head of state, but in the case of the United Kingdom, this does not come with any actual pragmatic political party. Government refers to the party in power, specifically the prime minister and his or her cabinet. So instead of having a written constitution, we have an unwritten constitution, which includes things like we've already noted, the Magna Carta from 1215, the Bill of Rights from 1689, the Act of Union from 1707, and various acts of parliament, judicial decisions, and customs. And so the United Kingdom is notable among the world's democracy because it has a very majoritarian parliament. And so under the rules of British parliament politics, the majority in parliament has virtually unchecked power. So the formal institutions of the British government are the Crown, the King or Queen, Parliament, which is the House of Lords and the House of Commons, and we also have an unwritten constitution. The Crown and the House of Lords are going to be and give symbolic and some meaningful and past history expression to Britain's autocratic past. But today they actually have little influence in shaping public policy. But it's good to note that the United Kingdom is about these traditions. Let's take a look at some of these institutions specifically, and let's start by taking a look at Parliament. And we said that it was bicameral, and that means that it has two separate chambers. The House of Commons is composed of 646 members of Parliament, what are called, abbreviated both verbally and written, as MPs. There is no specific constitutional restraints on the House of Commons. And while the body itself is extremely powerful, individual members of Parliament are less powerful than your average congressperson. The largest party, whoever controls the most seats, elects the prime minister along with his or her cabinet. And those individuals collectively are what we call government. So in the case of the United Kingdom, the party in power has complete control, or we should say at least the government are. All members of Parliament in the House of Commons are elected for a maximum of 5-year terms, although elections can come, and often are, come more often. So there's a 5-year expiration date, but it doesn't have to happen every 5 years. It can happen more often. It can't go any further than that. There are no term limits, so members of Parliament may return indefinitely as long as they can win. In the tiny rectangular chamber of Parliament that you see in the picture here, this is the House of Commons. Members of government sit along the table, and their opposition, often called the shadow government, and they sit facing each other. So that the MPs who are not part of government are called backbenchers. So they're along the left, you're seeing the backbenchers. And there's actually a neutral speaker who looks kind of like a judge that you see at the seat of the table. And that's the individual who presides over the House of Commons. The Lords, on the other hand, there are 800 members. There's 800 Lords. And there are two different kinds. You have life peers. These are individuals, distinguished citizens who are appointed by life by the Crown and the Prime Minister. There are 92 of them since the reforms in 1999. And then there are hereditary peers, and these are members because of birth, because they're dukes and earls and barons, etc. And there's been a big debate recently over what the role of the House of Lords should be. But we'll pause here because we're just doing an introductory overview. The Crown. Currently the Crown is Queen Elizabeth II, who is the symbolic representation of that traditional continuity of the British state. And so the cabinet is even known as Her Majesty's government, Her Majesty's army. So the symbolic head of state here is the Crown. The pragmatic political power player is the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister, as we've noted, plus his or her cabinet, is what we think of as government, and they have control. Most governments are very powerful, they're stronger, and they can do what they want to do in a way. So if voters are taking a look at government, they can go, well, if you're in power, the minority party can't block what you're doing. So it's easy to know who to praise and who to blame. Like most parliamentary systems that we look at, there's the possibilities for what are called votes of no confidence. This is when a chamber rejects a measure or a bill deemed of high importance to the government, and this brings down government. That means that government has to have new elections. And so in the United States, where you have fixed election term, one possibility for bringing up elections in the UK is a vote of no confidence, although normally it occurs when government determines that it wants an election. The electoral system in the United Kingdom is very similar to what you'd be used to in the United States. There are 650 constituencies, and each one elects one MP. Based on population, each of these districts contain about 68,000 voters. Now, put this in perspective, because in the United States, each of our districts are going to have about 270,000. So that's a little bit different. So there's two different ways that we can have an election. One, governments can come to an end when the Prime Minister requests that the monarch dissolve Parliament. The request must be made within 5 years of the previous general election, but it can be made at any time during that period. So the ruling party has an advantage. They get to determine the time and the place of the next election. Governments also fall, as we noted, when they lose a vote of no confidence, or if legislation is not passed, government falls and there are new elections. Because the United Kingdom is a unitary state, that means that there are no component parts, there's no federalism, so there's no real meaningful regional or local governments in that sense. All power is vested in Parliament. There have been some pushes for some localization. Northern Ireland has for a long time agitated for either being separate or having its own autonomy. In 1997, Scotland and Wales would vote to create their own legislatures to deal with certain specific local issues. And in 1998, there was an agreement to allow Northern Ireland to have its own assembly. But they are very minimal in comparison to what we think of as being a federal state. The major political parties in the United Kingdom, there's really three: the Labour Party, the Conservative Party, and the Liberal Democratic Party. We have a majoritarian parliamentary system. That means that political parties are extremely important because the party in power is the party that determines what government is. From World War II to the 1970s, there were really only two major political parties in the UK, and that was the Labour Party and the Conservative Party. Then, after 1974, we'll see a multi-party system has emerged with the birth of a centrist party called the Liberal Democrats. And let's briefly talk about each of these parties. The Labour Party forms in 1900 as an outgrowth of the trade union movement. And it's only after World War I and the expansion of the vote do they begin to be a major political party. It becomes a dominant political party after World War II with its landslide victory in 1945. It is a socialist party in the Fabian tradition. That means it is a socialist ideological party that wants to work within parliament, work within government, in order to bring about social democratic change. So it's in favor of a strong welfare state, and it would also be in favor of the state having ownership of some key industries. The Labour Party will undergo some shifts in the 1990s as it abandons some of its socialist principles and embraces a limited, more state-centric free market. The individual you might know who is connected with this is Tony Blair, who would become Prime Minister in 1994. And his reform policies would be called the Third Way. He will end up losing majority status in 2010 to Gordon Brown. And today, the Conservative Party continues to be the majority party. The Conservative Party, or the Tories, are more liberal than your typical Conservative Party that you'd be used to in the United States. It is part of what is called the collectivist consensus post-World War II. David Cameron is the current leader, and the party has had to wrestle with questions of how integrated the United Kingdom wanted to be with the EU. The party has had a rift, really, and its Eurosceptics have often won, which in more recent times has given the Conservative Party a lot of support in the United Kingdom, as the EU seems to struggle in some ways. Liberal Democrats, on the other hand, form in 1988, and through the merger of a Liberal Party and the Social Democrats. And its ideological position is a mixture of classical liberalism's emphasis on individual freedom and a weak state, with social democracy's emphasis on collective equality. So it's kind of like a libertarian party in some ways in the United Kingdom. The party's chief issue has been electoral law. They have wanted the United Kingdom to move from the single-member districts that we've talked about to a proportional representation system. The political economy in the United Kingdom is noteworthy because it has contributed to one of the dominant frames that we see happening around the world, liberalism. The UK is where the philosopher John Locke will speak of the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and estate, i.e. property. Yet liberalism as in a political system, classical liberalism, has undergone major changes in the United Kingdom. In fact, they are no longer the stronghold. If there's a common theme since World War II, it's actually been the decline of this, and the idea that the state should have a role in the economy. It will also be part of the beginning neoliberalism, the idea that countries should move back towards kind of a free market system. So that is our brief, right under the 20-minute mark, introduction to the United Kingdom, and we will stop here.